So welcome everyone. My name, oh, welcome everyone. My name is Tanya Johnson. I will be the moderator for today's session. Joining me is DC-AAPOR's Counselor at Large, Casey Tesfaye, who will also moderate today's panel. So this event will hopefully be the first of a series of conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, also known as DEIA. Today, we will have a unique opportunity to learn from researchers from underrepresented communities about their experiences working in public opinion research. DEIA efforts in the public opinion field usually consist of an expert speaker or structured training about hiring practices to promote diversity, or outreach strategies to increase representation in the data. Don't get me wrong, these topics are important. However, one often overlooked aspect is the invaluable insights of researchers from underrepresented communities currently active in the field. They are the true experts of their own experiences, and their insights shed light on what's working well, what needs improvement, and the unique contributions they can offer. We're excited to start today's discussion with a few words from our keynote speaker, Director Rob Santos from the U.S. Census Bureau. Then we will review some terminology to ensure that we're all on the same page about the meaning of certain words related to DEIA. And after that, we'll introduce our panelists and kick off the discussion. Okay, so we can go to slide 2. All right, thank you. So now it's time to introduce our keynote speaker. We are honored to have Director Rob Santos from the U.S. Census Bureau with us today. He is the 26th director of the Bureau and the first person of color to serve as a permanent Senate-confirmed Census Bureau director. His career includes over 40 years in survey research, from statistical design and analysis to executive-level management. In addition to his remarkable career, he has contributed significantly to AAPOR through his mentorship efforts and support to his peers. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Director Rob Santos from the U.S. Census Bureau.
Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. Hey, I hope you can hear me. I imagine that you'll let me know if you can't. But I'm really pleased to be here at this DC-AAPOR event. You know, not too many people know this, but back in the late 90s, DC-AAPOR was on the ropes as a chapter, unfortunately. We couldn't get anyone to run for office, etc. And I happened to be appointed the president of DC-AAPOR. And so I worked with Nancy Belden and with a couple of other people, and we literally resurrected DC-AAPOR. We had a vote, and we redid our bylaws, and it was an amazing time. There was a period of like 2 or 3 years from, say, 99 to 2002. And I was able to twist the arm of a young Claudia Dean, who's now at Pew, to run for president after me. So it's been really rewarding to see how DC-AAPOR has grown over the years. It is now a vibrant, active chapter. And this event, because it involves DEIA, is just really rewarding for me to be able to come back and give back to the community that's been so much a part of my career, and for which my experience with AAPOR has been so rewarding. So thank you for the invitation. I'm just honored to be here. And so let's talk, okay? So it's kind of interesting. We talk about DEIA. It's become politicized. They are letters that, stand for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And oftentimes I hear this notion of, hey, we need to do DEIA because it's the right thing to do. We need all people to have opportunity and to be included. And that is absolutely correct. It is part of a core value that benefits our society and each other. But it's also a way to better science, to better methods, to better data and actually to more relevant data in our business. And that's an aspect that maybe that we should recognize and promote because it we all aspire to better data and to more relevant data and more accurate data in our business. Uh, it's interesting because I've been preaching this. I've been going around the country preaching, uh, using the P word, preaching, uh, this notion that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is a part of our transformation as a society, our modernization as we, as a country, as a nation, become beautifully more diverse. We need to take advantage of that. That is a major asset for our country. And the way we can attain that is through this inclusivity, through bringing diverse voices to the table with, and I talk about survey research and survey measurement and um, censuses and enumerations, but really these principles apply to just about anything you do, any business model, any manufacturing or whatever. If you bring more diverse perspectives to the table, you enrich the insight, the possibilities, the creativity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how my journey through who I am as a Latino growing up in San Antonio, in the barrios, it brought me to a place to understand this and to be in a position at the Census Bureau where I can share my story. I can share this perspective and this learning that I did based on my own life and professional growth experience. And then I'm trying to pass on so that folks can take that, grab it, and then be a better, professional and even a better person by adopting these principles. My story, I've told it many times. It's on probably on the web somewhere if you ever wanted to take a look at that stuff. Um, but my journey as a kid growing up in San Antonio was really marked by self-doubt and then becoming an adult and such. I always did have a passion for statistics and for helping people, and I really had a passion for adventure. So I wanted to get out into the real world and do stuff. And it turned out that I allowed my passion for helping people, statistics, and adventure to push me beyond my comfort zone and allow myself to become vulnerable with this notion in my head of saying, "Yeah, I'm going to try it. And if it works, okay, it'll be great. And if it doesn't, at least I can look myself in the mirror and say, I tried." Um, I really, honestly, when I was growing up and getting into undergraduate school, I felt like a misfit. I started my college career um, by not going to any first not going to any what do you call it, high school advisor. And so I didn't realize, because I was a first gen college student, that that I couldn't do the following: graduate high school in May, look at universities in June, apply in July, and then go in September. That's how I thought things went, and obviously they didn't. So I went through community college and then ended up transferring to a university, 4-year university in San Antonio, but as an unconventional student, because I was married between my freshman and sophomore year in college. And so I didn't have the typical college life that most college students have. Um, then graduating from undergrad and then deciding to go into school, to graduate school, I took the GRE, and it turned out that I did fine in math because I was a math major. but my GRE score in verbal or reading or whatever they call it, the sort of the non-quantitative piece, I scored a 27th percentile. I really, you know, I didn't I didn't have a very good vocabulary. I didn't understand the nuances of words and things of that sort. And then to top it off, and I'm very blessed for this, I was probably one of the few students that, and before it got canceled, benefited from affirmative action. And I received a fellowship to go to Michigan. So I went to grad school, and it was a pretty awkward experience because I was there with a self-imposed chip on my shoulder, thinking maybe I wasn't good enough because of my 27th percentile. Um, my first stats course was a regression course. And of all things that the professor taught us, he used the example of SAT scores and how they predict success of students. And guess what he concluded based on his statistical analysis? He said the quantitative scores, they don't matter. What really matters is the verbal scores, the thing that I got 27th percentile in. So it didn't make me feel any better. So I had this, like I said, this chip on my shoulder to overcome. I had shyness, I had poor vocabulary, and I also had this two-way challenge that I've mentioned in my Hispanic heritage types of talks that I've given. On the one hand, I was a Latino coming from the barrio at Michigan, and so everybody looked at me as like, "Oh, this is the kid they had to let in with affirmative action. He's not good enough." On the other hand, I was a Latino who was a monolingual English speaker. I'm Latino de alma y corazón, but I'm monolingual. And so when I was back in the community and out with other students who are Latino and fully bilingual, they would kind of look down at me like, "What's wrong with you, kid? Why aren't you, bilingual like us?" So I felt like I had it coming from both directions. But interestingly, my culture, being a Latino, was a key source of strength. And it was really through my grandmother. And I'm not going to tell the story because I've told it too many times. But my grandmother, in self-reflecting on some experiences with her when I was a child, really brought to me this notion that I needed to bring my whole self to the table in whatever I do. That means my culture, my values, my life experiences, and the technical training that I had. And I've gone through my career slowly. It wasn't like bam, have all this learning that I have now because I'm a viejito and I can tell consejos, wise words nowadays. But it was a process of learning that I'm passing on to you right now, uh, of the value and how to leverage your whole self in order to develop better critical thinking skills, to develop new, innovative, creative types of thoughts and perspectives. And that when you and other people do it, then bringing those together adds real value and insight. The story I wanted to tell is actually one that involves my first and only panic attack back in 1999. I'm not going to tell that story, but it happened. And it happened when I was going to give an example. This is back in 1999, when we were first starting to talk openly about the value of cross-cultural research and essentially other perspectives, right? And I used the SF-36. I wanted to use that as an example. That is a battery, a short form battery of questions to get at a person's well-being and health. And it includes, and I'll read it to you, the following item that's one of the 36. It asks about moderate activities such as moving as moving a table, pushing a vacuum cleaner, bowling, or playing golf. And then it went on to stooping, can you stoop or do you do bathing? Is that a problem? You climb stairs, etc. But I don't know if you heard the moderate activities, vacuum cleaning, bowling, or playing golf. Bowling or playing golf. This was the early 90s before Tiger Woods. Who played golf? Basically folks in country clubs. White folks in country clubs for that rich fight. Who bowled? It was the working class whites at that time. Obviously, like in the past, I would have said, oh my God, this structural racism and all this other stuff. But my realization is what happened is that an individual used their whole self, brought their whole selves to the table, the person writing the questions. And from their perspective, that was a perfectly legitimate question for a very oops, somebody. Okay, good. That is how bringing one's whole self to the table, bringing diverse perspectives together, including them and using that can trigger better insights and create better science, better methods, better data, and more relevant data. So for yourselves, everyone listening, please bring your whole selves to the table. It'll create unique perspectives. You have your own unique perspective that nobody else does because no one else has your life experiences, your culture, your values. And it will amplify your critical thinking. You add that to others and we will have better science ahead of us. I'll leave you with that and pass it over to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Santos, for sharing. Yeah, I appreciate your consejos, your wisdom. It spoke to me. So thank you again. Before we begin our discussion and review some common terminology, I would like to address a common concern about the futility and future of DEIA initiatives. I will start with a little recap of how sentiments towards these initiatives have changed drastically on a national level in the United States during the last 4 years. So similar to what Director Santos was explaining earlier, we have seen this change in the past 4 years. It started in 2020, and 2020 was a year like no other. It was marked by significant social and political upheaval due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the heightened awareness of systemic racism following the murder of George Floyd. These crises prompted a widespread self-reflection and collective activism in both the private and public sector. And as a result, there was a notable increase in efforts to foster inclusivity and address longstanding inequalities across all sectors. However, in the past 2 years, anti-DEIA sentiments have risen in both the public and private sectors, partly due to political polarization, misinterpretations about the meaning of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the dismantling of important civil rights legislation. And although this backlash has led some to think that DEIA is dead, DC-AAPOR, as well as many of us in this meeting, do not agree with that statement. Adriel Parker, a diversity specialist, explained well the importance of continuing DEIA initiatives in a Forbes article. She stated, diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot die if there are people. Our diversity is what makes us humans. If we want to coexist peacefully in shared spaces, DEI is a requirement. Folks may want to call it something else, but the core goal of fostering understanding and fairness amongst people continues to be the same. To have a meaningful conversation, we want to ensure that we're on the same page about the definition of some terms. On the screen right now are a few words you might hear throughout today's conversation. Please take a few seconds to review the terms and how we define them for today's discussion. Okay, next slide, please. So now it's time to meet our panelists. The panelists we have today are amazing. They are very diverse in terms of their work, their experience, employers, expertise, and cultural identity. And panelists, I'm going to ask you if you could please turn on your camera and your mic when you are introducing yourselves.
See here. Hi, welcome. We are ready to start introducing the panelists. Let's start with Kai. Kai, if you can please tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about what motivated you to pursue a career in public opinion research, and also how your cultural identity has influenced your research interests and your work.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm super honored to be here today. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kai Fuentes, President and CEO of Ebony Marketing Systems. We're a multicultural, multilingual research firm. I have been in research since birth, really. So I grew up in the industry. My mother had a research firm for many years. And in 2009, I opened my own. And I did my first interview at 11, and I fell in love with research. I mean, it was in my blood, but I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with learning about different cultures, talking to people, hearing people's journeys. For me, as a Black Latina, this is personal. I enjoy, again, learning about cultures, but I also enjoy researching marginalized communities, underrepresented communities, to really help change those communities for the better. That's something that reigns true to my soul and to who I am and to our company goals. So being a woman of color and being able to research other communities that look like me and my staff is a real honor, and it's a real pleasure. And again, it's about giving back and doing projects that really sing to our soul, and helping communities of color that sings to our soul.
Thank you so much, Kai. Okay, Andre, can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Andre Sanabia Johnston, and I'm a qualitative research director at PSB Insights, which is a global marketing insights firm. And my passion for social science research really began at the undergraduate level. And I promise this isn't going to be a life story, my life story, but a close friend basically told me that I would really enjoy the Intro to Gender Studies course. And I signed up for it the next semester. And by the third class, I declared a gender and sexuality studies as my second major. So then what happened? Well, consulting was all of the rage at the university that I was at. And so when I was in my final year, I went to the job fair that was really focused on consulting firms. And I had my list of companies that I wanted to go to, but I felt like I needed to warm up with a random table. And so I saw a table that had an interesting name, Platinum Network. And I was like, what's that about? And so I went over to them, and they explained that they're a marketing research company that focuses on America's fastest growing segments, which are multicultural consumers. And so I fell into public opinion research by chance. But what it does is that it really allows me to blend my old academic interest, my cultural identity, and a paycheck to boot. So it's not the same type of research that I was poring over as an undergraduate, but has a level of tangible impact that really excites me. You know, I'm conducting research for organizations and brands that truly want to understand the needs and the values of their Latino consumers so that they can meet them in language. You know, I'm conducting research with low-income LGBTQ individuals so that a nonprofit can recommend better policy solutions or serve their constituents better. And so any opportunity that I can identify to conduct research with underrepresented voices at my organization is something that I go to, and how my cultural identity has influenced my research interest and the work that I enjoy doing.
Thank you so much. Arnell, why don't you go next?
I fell in love with statistics when I realized its predictive power. I remember taking a sociology of education course, and my professor explained to me that being from the Bronx, most of the people that I grew up with probably wouldn't go to college. And I didn't believe that that was true. I was like, no, we're first generation immigrants. And I think that our parents didn't go because they were immigrants, but most of us are going to go. And she was like, no, you're part of the 10%. And then when I looked around 5 years later after taking that class, I realized that, wow, most people didn't go. And so what I love about statistics is that you can predict what's going to happen and then try to change it. So without the numbers, without the story, you can't change anything because you don't know where it's going. So that's what made me fall in love with statistics. I work now interviewing underrepresented scientists, and just trying to understand what their struggles are. They meet with me privately most of the times, and I conduct qualitative interviews, and I present that data back to the companies that I work for in aggregate to protect their confidentiality. And it's made a lot of change. And so my work feels meaningful. And I do the same thing in the housing market. I like that I can capture people's voices and present that data back. In the housing market, my data goes to like the Maryland General Assembly, and I've seen a lot of change in legislation. And so I enjoy what I do.
Thank you. Victor, can you go next, please?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Victor Barajas. I come to you from the border of El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez. And I think my interest in public opinion research started circa 2006 while I was completing a master's thesis. My focus was on the US-Mexico immigration experience from the perspective of the deported migrants staying in the Mexican border towns. I wanted to understand the motivations, the experiences, and challenges of crossing the border. And at that time, back in 2006, the topic of immigration was not as contentious as it is today, but it was definitely important for the public and the political perception. So I feel like my interest really developed there. Spent over 6 months in different towns along the border interviewing migrants, government institutions, academics, and nonprofit agencies assisting migrants on the Mexican side. And I was gathering research and capturing the voices of these migrants, both visually and orally. So the goal is really to understand the issues of immigration, right? The economic conditions, the role of the human traffickers, and how both economies really benefited from and continue to benefit from the migration process. So I feel like this is how I started having this interest, right? In giving a research space to the voices of those underrepresented communities. And growing up in this bilingual, bicultural border town during my formative years, as well as my time in college, really shaped my perception of what it means to occupy two cultures, two languages, and the need to create ways to communicate this narrative and coexist with the space. So this really greatly influences my work. And as I continue to pursue opening spaces for equity and representation and research for minority groups by developing more tools, more resources, more materials, and always, of course, ways to communicate these efforts for larger audiences. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Barbara, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Barbara Edwards, and I'm a National Field Director at WestAd. I've been here for 13 years, and actually, Westat is my second career. I retired from medical marketing pharmaceuticals, where I called on doctors. I got into this field sort of accidentally, in that a friend told me, she's an artist, that she was working as, she had just been hired as a field interviewer for Westat on a health study, and she hated it. She hated it because it was cold calling, and she hated cold calling. Coming from medical marketing, pharmaceuticals, calling on doctors, I love cold calling. And she told me a little bit more about the study that she was working, which is a healthcare study. And it sounded like very, very important work. And I really wanted to do it. Long story short, it was a year later that Westat hired me as a field interviewer in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live. A few months doing interviewing, I came to understand and realize that some of the households that I was calling on, cases were weighted. And that means that the statisticians were making adjustments to avoid biases because the population wasn't fully represented. That really made me want to make sure that this group, which were mostly African Americans, I wanted to really increase that participation. So I was on a mission to increase participation, and I almost not let anybody refuse to do the interview with me. And because of the conversion rate or aversion rate, people agreed to really do the interview with me. And that brought me to Westat's attention. And I was promoted in the, up the ranks over the years. So what I like most about this work is that I think it's important. And that's what's passionate to me, that it is important. And it makes me feel good to know that I am doing important work.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you to all of the panelists for your introductions, for your thoughtful introductions. I'm excited now that we're able to dive into some discussion. And so we'll kind of get a little bit deeper into some of the topics that have already been touched upon. I can kind of give a minute here for all of the panelists to be repinned or re-spotlighted and turn their videos back on. I'll give you a minute to think, but let's start out by a little bit deeper into this. As a researcher, do you feel responsible for representing your cultural identity in your work?
I don't feel responsible for representing my cultural identity, but I do feel responsible for making sure that I represent the voices of the people that I'm interviewing. And I feel responsible for making sure that the feedback that I provide as a researcher is actionable. So I'm not just giving people data and throwing it in their lap and they don't know what to do with it. I take time and energy to make sure that I'm giving them something that they can use and that I facilitate a discussion that will hopefully change the communities that I represent.
Yeah, that's great.
This is something that I,
You go ahead. You go
Okay.
ahead.
This is something that I feel like I grapple with quite a bit, and I think that our identities are inherently a part of who we are as a research, and then how much you choose to have it in the background versus the foreground is really a personal and professional choice for everyone, and so it can really vary it's varied for me over time. But recently, it's been much more at the forefront because I will sometimes work with clients and stakeholders who, and this is just really generalizing, will be like, oh, I want to go and speak to, 5 Mexicans, and like that's going to be who we're going to talk to for like the entire Hispanic market, and we're going to make decisions based off of those 5 interviews. And I get really worried because as a Latino, that's that could be okay. You know, are we targeting Mexicans? Are we talking about those that, you know, recently immigrated? Are we talking about, you know, Mexicans that are down in Texas on the border versus those that are like migrant workers in Yakima, Washington versus like urban ones in Chicago? So like that could be a thing that we're doing, but I really see it as my responsibility to bring attention to some of the considerations for the people that I'm doing the research for, of who exactly it is that we're trying to target and who exactly it is that we're trying to talk to, so that we can make good methodological choices to make sure that we are talking to the right people, and to really bring attention to those underrepresented perspectives that sometimes aren't apparent in public opinion research. And so that is why, for me, I do feel a sense of responsibility to at least work my cultural identity into some of the work that I'm doing with my clients.
Yeah, I hear that. Kai, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was, but I mean, Arnell and Andres said it, they said it really well. I mean, I think as, you know, researchers of color, we are always kind of in that double box of we're a researcher, but we also identify with who we are researching in some instances. But making sure that we have a diverse cultural representative sample is paramount. And a lot of times clients do not understand that. They think all Latinos are a monolith, Blacks, or we all think the same, Latinos all think the same. But within that, there is the diaspora of these communities that are you know, within. You know, I know for the Black community, Black African Americans do not necessarily think the same way or purchase the same products as a Black Latina, or as a Black Caribbean, or as someone who was born in Africa with Black skin. So I think that, you know, explaining this to clients over and over and over again is fine. That's, you know, I know, part of our gig, but also making sure as researchers that we're doing what's best for these communities, making sure we're targeting folks with best research practices and with a proper representative sample.
Thank you. Barbara, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say additionally, I agree with Kai and everyone else, but also class, I think, as a field person, class has a role within cultures and races as well in the discussion.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, so I feel like personally, whenever I present, I'm going out in the public or in a meeting, anywhere where I'm presenting, I look in the mirror and say, do I look like $1 million? And not only do I look like $1 million, but do I know exactly what I'm going to say? Am I well prepared? And because I want everyone looking at me and listening to me to hear me. And I don't want the way I look to take away from my message. I want them to hear me first. And I want it to be elevated. I wanted it to be high quality. I want it to be the best. And because I'm representing not just myself, but I'm representing everyone. Everyone, all the Black women, my race, my company, I'm representing. So it's important that I elevate it as best as I can.
I feel like what you're describing, Barbara, is the POC tax, I like to call the people of color tax, right? There's a tax that, you know, an undefined tax that we pay, that we have to feel seen. We have to always, if we're going to do something, we have to show out. We have no room for mistakes or no room for error. And, you know, so if we're going to do something, we got to go hard in the paint. And I really think that's just like, that's the world in which we live. And I like to call that the POC tax.
And it shows. My mother used to tell us, competence builds confidence. If you want to be confident, then you have to know what you're talking about. You have to know it. When can you stop practicing your instrument? When you know how to play it, then you can stop.
I think that our culture identity, it's really it's part of who we are, right? I don't think this is something that we can just like turn on and off. I feel like, like Barbara's saying, you always have to be prepared and present your best self, but I'm always going to be brown and I'm always going to be Latino. And, the way I approach my work, like or ethics or values or beliefs or expectations, this is greatly influenced, by our cultural identity and how we present our work. And I feel like having this conversation right now of identity in the workplace is extremely important, right? Because we are in this panel because we want to advocate for our people, for underrepresented groups. But I do strongly believe that it really is very much part of our identity of just, this is who I am. I'm a Latino, I'm brown, the end, this is how I come into the world.
I want to say too that I think that I try to advocate for like all the different underrepresented groups. So when you ask about me, feeling like I need to represent my culture, I don't know. I grew up in the Bronx, so I feel like, the Bronx is 50% Black, almost 50% Black, 50% Hispanic. So I feel like I need to represent their interests, my interests, and then Native Americans. I went to Alaska last year and I was like, wait a minute, they're struggling too. So in research, I just feel like I need to try to understand like all these different groups, because if I do have the opportunity to speak, I need to be saying and presenting data that helps all of them, because they may not have the opportunity to speak on that same panel at the same time. So I don't know if the rest of you guys are like that. Like, do you think about all minority groups? Do you focus on yours? I'd be interested to know.
I'm with you. I feel like we're all in it together. Shout out to another New Yorker. I'm from Queens originally, the most multicultural city in the world. It doesn't get any more multicultural than Queens. And we got Yonkers in the house too.
Yeah.
All right, New York. So I hear you. I feel like we're all in it together.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that, none of us can thrive until we all thrive. So that means AAPI, that means Latinos, that means Native Americans, all the minority groups. So I'm with you.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think that once you have started to do some research amongst these, underrepresented audiences, there are some considerations that you start to think about across all of them. And so what immediately came to mind when you asked that question was that, I'm not Asian American, but I have worked on studies with Asian Americans. And I know that when doing research with Latinos, we want to factor in language and language proficiency, and that might impact the scope of work that we do and the methodology that we go into. And so those are things that I'm also thinking about when I'm doing research with other cultures. And so I really loved what was said by Rob at the beginning of just like making sure that you're bringing in diverse perspectives, because then everyone is starting to think about their own identity and the things that they would consider within their sort of audience groups, and how might that be relevant to a new audience that we want to sort of give them a voice as well.
You all are kind of like moving through the questions, even before I have a chance to answer them, which is great. So I think we've already kind of delved into this, but really, like, I want us to delve a little bit more into how you've navigated issues of representation and inclusion in your work. And that's like in terms of your research, in terms of study participants, within your research team, and in the subject matter of the research.
I'll go ahead and start. So when I started working in this field, specifically talking about the Hispanic community, the resources and the training for field interviewers were very limited. And the idea of reaching the Hispanic community as an important member of data collection process was just very limited. It was almost as if, we assumed that the Hispanic community would just simply participate given their friendlier disposition. So, I started developing more training tools for bilingual, both at the corporate level and at the project level. And I feel like preparing our bilingual interviewers is one of the first steps, engaging with Hispanic survey participants. And, like these trainings, including addressing challenges specific to the Hispanic community. So it's, it could be immigration, could be limited access to healthcare, resources, or it could be just the knowledge of surveys in general. So I feel like personally, I focus on this, and I focus on refining the language skills of interviewers and developing materials and resources for participants. And I feel like this is just an effort to get more cooperation and to reach this, percentage of every survey that we have and try to be more inclusive for all of them.
In my work, I'm almost always provided with the population that I'm going to study. So my focus has been more on like the interpretation of the data, because I've found that even when the sample seems representative, the way it's interpreted by majority groups is very different than the way I interpret the data. One time in a class, they were talking about, say, kids say in low income neighborhoods walking home from school, and all these kids were walking alone, right? Nobody is home, nobody's watching them. And I was like, well, why is that the conclusion? In my neighborhood, we were walking home, but all of our grandmas were home and all of our grandmothers were looking out the window. So maybe we need to talk to the families and see, is there someone at home with these children? Because all my friends, they had grandmothers at home too. So I think people who are looking at data for populations of which they are not a part, they may interpret it differently. And so I like to bring in diverse voices to look at the conclusions, or even the methodology, things like that, because I don't get to choose the population. But I think that's important too.
Yeah, and I agree. We don't get to choose the population. We don't really have too much input in the questions that are asked. Sometimes we can have a little input and they may revise the questions. What's important for us is response rates, and response rates coming from different segments of the population. So it's important to get high response rates across all segments of the population in the study. And part of that involves having the right interviewer. And the right interviewer may mean somebody of that same culture, or somebody that's acceptable of that culture, or somebody who is knowledgeable about a specific respondent's culture. We don't always have that. And we do the best we can to compensate for it. When we get a refusal from a respondent, we ask the interviewer who has taken the refusal, who would be the best kind of person to go back to talk to this household. And we try to match that as best we can. When we hire, the best hire are referrals, really. And we also have a lot of difficulty hiring in certain places. Like we can never hire in certain cities. But it's important for us to try to match interviewers as best we can with certain cultures. We can't always do that. We do have some really good interviewers who love their work, who understand their job, and they can interview across cultures. We have many interviewers that way, but it does sometimes require a specific interviewer. It might be even a male or a female to go to a specific household.
I totally agree. You know, a culturally aligned moderator and or interviewer is paramount, period. Like recently, I just thought about this when you were speaking, Barbara. Recently, I had a client um, come to me to do some moderating for IDIs, and it was Black women hair care. The client was not a Black woman. He was a white male. And he came and said, "Hey, Kai, you know, these women aren't sharing anything with me, and I don't understand." He was telling me terms, and he was like, "I don't understand any of these terms." And I was like, right, because you're not speaking the right language. And there is a cultural nuance that happens when you culturally align moderators and interviewers with the actual respondent. There are things that are said that have never, that are not even, you know, the words don't even come out, but the body language, the look, the way, you know, people are just dealing with each other. That's a language in itself. And that's why culturally aligned moderators and interviewers, it's really paramount to everything we do, really.
I agree with that. And I think it also comes down to also recognizing ourselves too when we might not be the right fit for certain experiences too, because it can be very easy for my organization to be like, well, you know, Andre's Latino, he has a background in moderation. He should be the one who's like moderating these focus groups with like recent immigrants, right? And I have had an experience in the past where I had to sort of like take up a group with like immigrants recently, and I could tell within the first 10 minutes that I was not building the same level of rapport that my boss, who was unable to make the groups, and you know, is a recent immigrant and has those experiences and has an accent, because English is her second language, and I had to realize after that you know, maybe I'm not the best fit for every single Latino group because I don't represent all of those experiences. And so that was also a very humbling moment for me too, to recognize that yes, there is a certain level of in culture, but if you are really trying to dig into certain experiences, you want to make sure that the moderator is also aligned or has some experience with those past narratives.
Oh, Barbara, you're on mute.
So I sometimes recruit and interview candidates. And one of the questions we ask, this is not verbatim, but it's similar, is, so you're going to have to be going into respondents' households, interviewing people of all social economic groups. How do you feel about this? And I had a candidate, most of the time, most candidates will offer some example of an experience where they've interacted with low income or poor people. And there was a candidate who said to me, "I grew up poor, so I have no problem with poor people. My concern is rich people. I'm not sure I know how to deal with them." And that was the first time in several years of interviewing that an interviewer went in that that a candidate went in that direction with that response. And I was quite impressed with her because she understood, I felt like she understood that there are different social economic groups. Doesn't mean all poor people. It means a gamut of things. And she recognized that.
So I feel like this speaks to the idea of, you know, when you're conducting a large survey in, you know, magical world, you would have interviewers that would match the respondents, right? If you have Hispanic interviewers, then you match them, the Central Americans, you send the Central American interviewer. If you have Puerto Ricans, you send a Puerto Rican interviewer. If you have an Afro-Latino, you send it. But I feel like that is, in many ways, you know, Barbara, you were doing more recruiting. It's very challenging because you might have an Afro-Latino in the Bronx and your interviewers in Texas, you know, it might be cost prohibitive to fly that person over there. So I feel like it has to be efforts to in this conversation of inclusivity, of providing tools to everyone, to make sure that we're able to have these conversations, right? Like Barbara was saying, this, candidate was like, I've never dealt with, people that are wealthy. And it's like, okay, so how do we deal with that? Like, what are the tools that we can provide interviewers? What are the different measures that we can take on this? Because I feel like as much as I would want to have a matched, interviewer to ethnicity or race or income level, I feel like that is extremely challenging. So I feel like one of the things that we do is trying to provide more tools to just all the interviewers, so they can communicate with the greater population.
Victor, you've talked a lot about training. You've kind of touched on a lot of different areas of training. And it kind of leads me to wonder, have you ever felt like because of your cultural identity, you were given responsibilities that either didn't correspond with your role or maybe you weren't compensated for?
So I feel like this question is, we tend to be the ambassadors, right, of our representative group. You're the Latino, then you become the spokesperson and the sport for the Latinos in general. So I feel like, yes, I have been given these responsibilities, but I really do think that it's an opportunity. I see that as an opportunity, right, to change the conversation, to be more inclusive, and to show not only that as Latinos we can train and we can develop materials and do all these different things, but we can also be dispelling, stereotypes. You could be like, or Latinos are a certain way and they like this or they like that, and be like, well, it's a lot more nuanced and complicated than that. So I feel like when you're in that position, I take that as like, sure, I'll take that responsibility. Of course, always more compensation is always appreciated. But I do see it as an opportunity to engage, right? Engage with the respondents, engage with the interviewers, and engage with your fellow coworkers, so they can see like the nuisance of training. I remember doing training in the last project that I was in, and I would invite the project directors, I would invite everyone so they could see the interactions that would happen between the bilingual interviewers and the challenges that they would be encountering at the door. And I was like, these are skills that are transferable. It's always, again, I go back to the idea. I'm like, I would love to have like a gigantically diverse set of people, but that would be cost prohibitive. And I would much rather be able to give as many tools as possible to everyone, because I feel like it is this lack of interaction with other people that prevents us from understanding where people are coming from. If you grew up with, I don't know, in a white neighborhood and you've never encountered interactions with either Black or Hispanics or other groups, then your basis of knowledge might be very limited. But as interviewers, we bring them in and we're like, okay, this is how it works. This is how, Latinos are like this. If you approach a Latino household, if you approach a Black household, these are the things that, resonate with them. I feel like we can gain a lot.
Yeah, this happened to me quite a bit when I was earlier in my career and before I gained the confidence to advocate for myself and sort of set my boundaries, where I was asked to translate some of the Spanish open-ended questions, or, oh, we have like a few survey questions that we want to add last minute. Like, can you just translate them yourself? To which, when I was younger, and I finally decided to set that boundary, it was because I was just like, well, this isn't a part of my job description, so let's add it to it if that's something that we would like to do, and then let's also compensate appropriately. But then a few years later, it was that plus the fact that I am not trained in translation. And so even though I grew up speaking Spanish, I did a few years of my schooling back in the Dominican Republic when I was in my teens, like I still do not have the same skill set as people whose entire professions are to do professional translations. And so that was an instance where I felt like I was being asked to do some extra responsibilities because of my cultural background, but then being able to like shift it and say like, hey, let's compensate the people that truly do have that skill, and get them some business as well, and bring them into the research process as well.
I think I would agree with Andre. I've been asked to do extra work. And yes, especially as a contractor, like people try to add a whole bunch of research work that's not in your contract. And when I was younger, I would do it because it was an opportunity to gain experience or to, be an author on a paper. But as I've gotten older, I've learned to say, hey, let's revisit my contract. So yeah.
I feel like I can speak from a small business owner perspective, that I feel like a lot of times folks don't understand because we are a company of all people of color, folks don't understand our worth. So we can send a bid or they'll say, oh yeah, we know multicultural is more money, and then not really mean it, right? And so I find that sometimes we spend a lot of time justifying our cost and justifying our worth. And, as a business owner, I'm like, well, if we were a white company, would you ask us all of this? Or we've been in situations where we've bidded on the same project, on a multicultural project, by the way. We're going after it. A white company is going after it. A white company will win it and sub it to us. And I'm like, you know what? We're going to keep these same prices. And guess what? They accept it because from the actual prime, they get the actual money that they want with a cherry on top. So it's, it's to your point, Andre, it's like establishing boundaries and understanding your worth. And that goes from personal, individual to a company.
Yeah, you kind of led me right into the next question, which is have you ever felt like you had to over-explain your credentials for a position?
All the time.
I over-explain as a practice. Like every presentation, I'm going to start with, I have a master's degree. I went to this university just to cut through all the fog that stereotypes and racism creates. Like, let's just start with, I'm educated. I've been doing this 23 years. And I find that it makes it easier for me to just present my research and have people just trust what I'm saying. I get less pushback.
I'm 1,000% in agreement with you. I always feel like that I have to work my way into folks thinking that I'm an expert at multicultural research when I already am. And it's like, wait, Kai, why are you sitting here convincing people? Nah, girl, you got it. Go ahead. But I find myself that sometimes I still have to, hey, everybody, I've been doing this X amount of years and blah, 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 blah. And I got this and I got that. It's tiring.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. And you know what? I'm not going to do it anymore. Actually, I am making an actionable pledge to not do that anymore. Anyone could join me if they want. Come on.
So we'll do a study and see like how it works. Do we get a lot of pushback or like what happens? So, but I'm with you, Kai. I'll report back.
I need to create a post.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I think most of us, in this panel have experienced something similar, right? We really try to overperform or demonstrate our capacity. We have to go to greater lengths, than members of the groups. But I really do see it as an opportunity, right? We can engage in this conversation. We can dispel stereotypes. We can provide concrete examples of our capabilities, right? I've been, fortunate to have seen the arc of less representation in the years past to more efforts, right, to change this. So I've, can speak of this in a positive light of, we think about this 20, even 10 years ago, the way these experiences are happening, I would see them a lot more often. And in the last few years, I just feel like I've seen a lot more spaces. And I feel like this panel right here is the perfect example of that, right? Like we're developing these spaces where we can, have these conversations, but we can also see what is happening. We're all coming from different fields, which I think is really great because I can get to see what Kai's experience is, what Andre's experience, and with Barbara and I experience in large survey research. But I do really see this as an opportunity to change minds and to change conversations. And I don't know when it will end, where you have to over explain your credentials, but I feel like the more conversations we have, I want to believe that the more people will believe that, oh yeah, Latinos, Afro-Latinos, all these minority groups, have a seat at the table. They can have these conversations, they can perform, and they can do the work.
No, I hear you, Victor. I mean, I feel like we've come a long way, but we have so much far to go, quite honestly. And I think that, we as an industry, as a country, we talk a lot about DEIA, but I'm going to add an extra A onto that, which is action, because it's great for us to talk about it. But what actionable things, like how you were saying earlier, Victor, about like training, that's an actionable thing. And I think that's great for interviewers to have training. But how are we as a society going to actually put action into DEIA? We hear it all the time. We're talking about it, and we have some seat at the table, but is it a real seat? And as people of color, are we actually really making decisions, or are we just put in a place where, we're a figurehead, where we kind of make decisions, but behind the door, there's somebody else really making decisions? Just a thought. I think action needs to happen. And I don't know what all that is and what that looks like. I mean, I have an idea of what that looks like, but
Mhm.
I agree, Kai. I think that it's important to make sure that minorities aren't just there as a token, just to be there, just as a face, but to fund work done by minorities, minority institutions, and stuff like that, so that they can be in decision making roles. Like I said, when it comes to research and the conclusion, I can have it. And there have been times when I'm in a research group, I'm speaking on the research because you're talking about a community that I'm from. But the way it comes out at the end is based on whoever is leading the research, or the majority group that's performing the research. So I think part of the action has to be funding minorities to do the work in their communities.
compensating them appropriately.
Definitely.
And I would also add to that sort of investing in the pipeline. I feel that I've been at organizations where the folks who are at the more junior level are definitely, a little bit more mixed. We're getting some more multicultural presentation, but then you go on our website and look at the 25 VPs that we have, and really only 5 of them are people of color. And so we don't have that sort of representation at the top. And so something that I've been very invested in from a young age, or since college, because of a church from Mary Church Terrell that's lifting as we climb, onward and upward we go, is always making sure that I'm keeping an eye out for anyone who's sort of coming behind me and finding what opportunities I can provide them, or what sort of mentorship I can provide them to have them also start to sort of, climb whatever ladder it is that they are trying to climb, to make sure that we can start to see some of that representation up at the top.
Yeah, I can only ditto what Andre is saying. I think to change institution, it takes change from within, and it takes staying power and a willingness to endure. And it means that institutions, organizations need to know who is interested in career development, promote from within, make continuing education development a priority.
Thank you. Thank you all for your responses. And since we're talking about, action items or like opportunities, I wanted to see if you all could provide an example of someone you felt that was an ally or supported you in your work. For example, like creating opportunities for more experience, leading a project, or telling others about your skill sets in higher level meetings. Did any of you experience that in your career path? And can you share that example of how you felt like they were a great ally?
I think that what Andrew was saying, helping each other out, and what Barbara's saying, promoting from inside the project or the company. I think we've all been, in one way or another, fortunate to have had someone that believed in us, right? Like someone that pushed us, someone that said, Victor, Bar, or Kai, or that believed in the capacities that we have. So I feel like I've been fortunate to have had like someone in management see the potential and be like, hey, there's more that you can do. And having someone that pushes you, someone that guides you. And now that I'm in a higher position as a field director, I feel like now I'm in a position to help others, right? Like I'm in a position to, help other minority groups and people of color and be like, hey, I see the potential in you. Someone saw that potential in me and helped me, develop my skill set. So I feel like it's in some ways like our responsibility, right? To give back and reach out to just the way someone did to us, reach out to other people, to, like Andrew was saying, junior staff, so we can start putting more people in positions of power. And decisions part was you really do have a voice, and a voice that matters, and a voice that can make decisions, and it can guide the research, it can guide the funding, it can guide the training. I think that is really important. So I feel like I feel fortunate to have done that, to have had that, and I hope that I can do the same for many other people, that are coming up, and giving them those resources and training and experiences. So we can, try to put as many people, get a seat at the table, and help us, make decisions that are more inclusive for everyone.
I can say a long, long time ago when Casey and I were little girls, she was very instrumental. I remember talking to her about like a manager. I was like, I don't understand, what he's asking me to do. And she gave me a book. She may not even remember, a book about how cultures speak differently. And it changed my whole life. Like it said that like sometimes with guys, they will speak, it's like they will tell you something is wrong, but they really want you to respond to it. And it talked about all the different groups and like kind of how different groups communicate. And it changed my whole life. The manager that I was complaining about, he would say, your statistics is wrong. And I'm like, Casey, it's right. I checked it 10 times. After I read her book, I realized he wanted a response. He wanted me to say, no, my statistics is not wrong. I checked it 10 times. I thought he checked it and was telling me it was wrong. So I appreciate people, like regardless of their race, culture, or whatever, if we can reach across the aisle and say, hey, you're missing this. Maybe you don't know that. Maybe there's some type of cultural expectation that you're not aware of. And so, I appreciate Casey for that. But also in my career, almost all the research contracts that I work on come from referrals. Companies that I've worked for referring me to other companies and saying, she does a really, really good job. And so, and I do that with people that I know, so we kind of refer each other. And so, yeah, networking and reaching across the aisle to help each other has been really, really instrumental in my career. And that's why I'm doing work right now that I really enjoy, because it's all work that I'm getting from my network, who cares about the same community that I care about. And, they all do research.
Yeah, I can say there have been several people at Westat who have helped me grow and develop, pull my coattail when I'm headed in the wrong direction. it's several people that I could name that have really helped me at Westat, and recognize my skills and abilities and potential, and help me align myself to be in a place where I can grow some more and develop. So I can say Westat has done a good job with that for me.
Yeah, same. I've had a lot of colleagues help along the way. Arnell, to your point, word of mouth too has been a huge help for our business. We don't really have to advertise, which is great, because word of mouth, and in that way, that is folks lifting as we climb. And a couple of years ago, I was asked to co-chair a conference for the Insights Association. And the co-chair said, I only want, and she's not a person of color. And she's like, I only want a person of color. And the only person, they didn't have as many people of color chairing. And she's like, the only person I really want to work with is Kai. And I was like, okay, great. This is amazing. So I was able to co-chair a conference, and then things, spiraled from that. And it was because I was given the opportunity, I then was able to say, bring on some other folks of color to help with the conference. And then now that spiraled into something totally different in the conference. It's a lot different now. And it's good. It's good to have that.
And I would also add that in addition to the mentors, it's also really important to either, if you're a person who comes from an underrepresented background, to have your cheerleaders or to be a cheerleader to someone else. Because oftentimes, especially when I was younger, there were lots of things that I felt kind of insecure about. I wasn't sure about opportunities to go after. And it was always that, like, I have a really good best friend who's just like, well, why wouldn't you be qualified for that? Are you kidding me? You're amazing. You do everything so well. And I'm just like, you've never been in the office with me. How would you know any of these things? And that wasn't like the point. The point is that, like, she was instilling in me like the confidence to actually go after opportunities that I myself thought I wasn't qualified enough for, when in fact I probably was. And so either finding your cheerleaders or being a cheerleader for someone else is also incredibly beneficial, even if you're not, working in the same industry, same field, same project. But just giving people that push, that confidence to know that they are someone who is excellent and valued and really good at what they do.
I would love to just kind of jump in for a second here, because there's somebody on the line who I think really just embodies in such a way how to nurture and maintain a diverse workforce. So Alisu Shua-Glusberg, she's on the line, and she talked to me once about not really knowing how to answer some questions about it. And I was thinking, I mean, she embodies it to a T in the way that she's able to recognize people's strengths and weaknesses, the way that she's able to train and mentor teams in so many different languages in order to like develop different cultural and with the work that she does and the way that she's just naturally always involved like a flexible work schedule, so that anybody who's got a different kind of situation, it's not anything you need to blink an eye over, because if you're able to do the work, then it really pays off. And you see that really just kind of paying off with her, with the way that she's able to have like such a diverse and invested workforce, with the way that she's able to, like, for example, with recruitment, it often came into pass that it would be much more beneficial to have somebody contacted in the evening or on a weekend or something like that. She had people then, so it was okay for her to be able to be in any kind of situation, because she had that kind of inherent flexibility in her approach and schedule. So I think when it comes to advocacy, I mean, I think that she is somebody who just embodies it in a better than I've ever seen anybody do. All right, I want to thank the panelists. We still have a few more questions to kind of wrap us up. I feel like there's so much more that we could talk about, and that's why we talked about this as really being the beginning of a series of conversations, because there's so much that you guys touched on that we would love to get deeper into, but we just don't have time to. But I'll let Tanya kind of wrap us up, ask a few kind of final questions, and
Okay. Thank you all for your responses, and I definitely relate as well. Since we're doing shout outs, for me, it's Nicholas Kalich. He would always, I feel like he's always sharing my skill sets with other people. I'm hearing from other people like, oh, I heard that you can do this or you could do that. And it has created a lot of opportunities for me. So I agree with everyone. I think just having someone in your corner advocating for you. And then I also agree with Andre as well. We need cheerleaders, right? We all need cheerleaders. And so, sometimes having that friend that will hype you up before a call is awesome as well. So my last question for the panelists is, if you could give someone that is still in the early part of their career from an underrepresented community, like they're about to join this field, what advice would you give them? What is like just navigating this? They're a little concerned, they're thinking about it. What would you say to them?
I guess it's my response is the response from the last question, which is, I guess, find your cheerleaders, and learn your worth earlier, sooner rather than later.
For me, I think I would say that it's important to have a network that you can like filter your data to. One of the questions talked about like having time in your work to do DEIA work. And a lot of times that's hard. There's only 40 hours in a workday. And so I don't have the effort or energy a lot of times to do the advocacy work, but I do have friends who do advocacy work. Like that's what they do. So I make sure that like I share my data with them, no matter where I'm working, no matter what company I'm working for. I'm like, hey, this is what's going on in science with minority groups. This is what's going on with housing. And they take that information to where it needs to go, right? And I've seen changes in policy because of that. So that's what I would say, find your network, and work with those people. Do talks. Talks have been really helpful. You can get your ideas out that way. So that would be my suggestion.
I would definitely second the cheerleader. That I think is what really has gotten me through so many difficult moments. But if you are a younger researcher who is perhaps having a difficult time, I would say to also remember like the impact of what you're doing. Some of us are working on some really important research studies that can make a real difference for either our communities or other represented communities. And so I think that can help to really drive your fuel and your passion, and always look for opportunities. I know that, we have, as researchers, have our own expertise. And so, for example, like if I'm looking for a moderator, I'm looking within the research community typically, but remember that there's always opportunities to collaborate with people outside of the research community, and who are also going to bring great insight and value into the research study itself. So also always keep an eye out for any community organizations that you might be able to partner with later on that also serve those communities that you can bring into the research world with you as an ally.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. It's really important to create connections, to do collaborations, to really start building a network, right? Of people that are going to be in your corner, that are going to, alert you of opportunities. But it is a process that, you have to put forth effort and energy and put yourself out there. You know what I mean? Like be more engaged and self-promoting and talking to people, going to conferences, going to organizations like this. So you can start creating that network and people can see what you can do as you start building your career. I feel like that is really important. Start, planting seeds all the time with different groups, with different organizations. So they recognize your name, they know who you are. And as opportunities start developing, they can start thinking of like, oh yeah, I remember this person from this conference, or you can do a collaboration, just things that put your name out there. But I feel like it is a process that could be long, but it needs to be self-involved. Like you need to advocate for yourself. You have to be your best cheerleader.
Yeah, I can say ditto to everything that everyone else has said. Anything different I would add is to sort of investigate the field be knowledgeable about what's out there, what's available, what opportunities are available. Try different things. Stay open.
Okay, well, thank you all for your responses and for your advice. We appreciate that. We have a few more minutes for the session. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank all of the panelists for taking the time out to participate today, and also a special thanks to Director Rob Santos and his team. We really appreciate you all and the conversations that we had today. On the screen right now, you will see a list of upcoming events and opportunities. We ask for everyone to please follow the DC-AAPOR social media account for more information on this. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Definitely thank you for everyone who came, who attended, who participated, and everything. Tanya and I worked on developing this event for 10 months and involved so many people in the process, and it's wonderful to see it happening. So thank you all so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite.
having us.
Thank you.